And like, I had a really good like temper. I just kind of laughed it off. But then he was saying some things that were kind of getting annoying, you know, like starting to aggravate me. So it's funny. I started to chase after him, and good thing my mom was at the other end of the beach. She goes,
"This is gonna hurt. It's time for the Suffering Podcast. Either a person spends their life attempting to get into the spotlight or hiding from it. It's common to want what you don't have. Sometimes what life presents us with is out of our control. The danger comes when you try to work against your natural gifts. Anything that's given, if used properly, can be an asset. All you have to do is swim with the tide rather than against it. Once you accept who you are, all that you're given becomes your superpower. You use your assets to your advantage and finally grow into yourself. A whole new world is opened up simply by accepting how you were born. I'm Kevin Donaldson here with Mike Falaise, and welcome to the Suffering Podcast. If you're a fan of overcoming adversity and overcoming suffering, then we're for you, because that's what we do, and that's the stories that we highlight. So do me a favor, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, please comment, and now you can join. Ring the bell to get notified of all of our new content, and don't forget to like us on all social media so you can find out exactly what we're up to. On this episode of the Suffering Podcast, we welcome Blake Rosell to discuss the suffering of the big man. Blake's stature pretty much matches his personality. I think Blake might be the tallest guy we ever had in the studio. Blake, thanks so much.
Kevin, thanks for having me on. And it's a pleasure to be up here. And I love the studio, by the way.
He turned sideways to come in the door.
I know, he's got a duck. It's like I in college, Giants had their summer camp at my college, and I was with John Elliott. John Elliott used to let the duck get through the door. He was just a giant mammal. How was your drive up here? Listen, I just made that drive on Saturday. It sucks.
Yeah, you know what? It wasn't too bad. It was cool seeing New York City for the first time in a couple months. They normally don't come up this way, but it was really neat being able to see the city, and I got lucky all the way up until I hit the city, and then coming around and hit a little traffic, but it wasn't too bad.
See, South Jersey traffic's the same as North Jersey traffic. I don't care what anybody says.
But then you hit the Central Jersey, and you fly right through that.
Well, no, not on Saturday. I was down there on Saturday. I saw Chris DiStefano at Borgata, and it took me 3.5 hours to get down there, 3.5 hours to get back.
And from where you're at.
Yeah. It was awful. I hate that ride.
I think New Jersey in general is just like a congested area, right? You're going to hit traffic north, central, south, wherever you go.
Because the roadways are archaic. When they first built those roadways, they didn't know there was going to be that many cars on the road.
But the problem is they keep expanding the traffic. The more lanes actually makes more traffic, because eventually it's got to come back down. And I always tell everybody, if you were to look at the Parkway from a helicopter, it would look like an inchworm, Fast, slow. It's aggravating as hell.
But listen, it's not as bad as Long Island. I went to Long Island a couple weeks ago. It took me almost 2.5 hours to get to the place I wanted to go to. On the way home, it took me an hour and 5 minutes.
Unfortunately. Well, let's give a big shout out to our marquee sponsor. That's Toyota of Hackensack. We don't trust anybody as police, but we do trust them. So if you're looking for a car, go to toyotahackensack.com. Let them find you a car. They're real good guys over there. Ask Mike's father. He'll tell you all about it. The thing, you gotta pull the thing down in order to
He still doesn't know what all the buttons are.
So Blake, each week we take a question from our audience. This week's question comes from Annie356. Says, why do you like doing your show so much? You have your own radio show. I know you it's a labor of love, because if it's anything like this show, it's not a living, but it is a labor of love. So I'm going to leave this one to you. Why do you like doing your show so much?
Well, that's a great question. And I take this back to when I was younger, and I was always told, you got the personality where you can be in front of the television, or you can be in front of the mic. And I was always told that by family members, friends, and all that, all the people close to me growing up. And obviously, as you know, we discussed before on my program, I went to school for all those things. But something really struck me to want to hear other people's stories and then hear how they kind of developed into their careers, right? And not just so much hearing about what they actually do, but the camaraderie and the conversation. I enjoy listening to people. I enjoy the conversation and being able to hear what these people have to say. And my love for the show is being able to take, what these people are saying and just kind of give that experience to others, right, who are listening, my audience, and where they're able to kind of, maybe make their dream come true one day, or if they were thinking about doing the profession that whatever guest I had on, and they'd say they're a famous DJ, or they own a restaurant or a business, or they're an actor. How do you follow those steps? How do you become, how do you become the big thing one day?
You're looking for the secret sauce in each one of them, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's what really what drove me to do my show was to kind of find out about different people's backgrounds and find out about what people do, how they got to where they got, right? And I think that was my idea for the show was it originally going to be, I'm going to say my original thought was, since I'm down in South Jersey, I'm going to say what's happening this weekend in Atlantic City. I'm going to say what restaurant to go to, restaurant week. The boat show's in town, right? And I may still do those events, or I may still recognize those events on my show. But I turned it more into a talk show platform where it's kind of like a podcast, as you know, and a live radio show every Wednesday. But what I enjoy about it is the conversation most of all. And that's what really drove me to want to do the show, was a conversation with someone I've never met before, or maybe someone I've known for a while, but I didn't really know much about them, and I got to discover more about them. My audience got to discover more about that individual. So I think that's the passion behind understanding people's stories and having them broadcast that to an audience, I think is, really why I did the show. And I've been really enjoying doing that over some time now, being able to hear from the guests.
I think it's just the beginning. Mike, what do you think? Why do you like doing the Suffering podcast?
I think you hit the nail on the head, though. It's getting to know people, getting to know the guests. Most of the times when a guest comes in here, it's the first time we've ever met, like face to face, and you get to know what they're all about and what their story is. Right. And once they get their story out, yours is a little different. Yours is like people who built businesses and, ours brings people down to their depths.
Right.
And to see them come back up, and we have a great relationship with pretty much everybody that's ever been on this show.
Yes, that's true.
Just for an hour of sitting here talking to them. And that's what I really enjoy about it.
I really love hearing the stories. I love letting them release their own traumas or their suffering, whatever their life is about. But what I really love is you get somebody who's never been in front of a microphone. I know Mike is getting this joy too. You get somebody who's never been in front of a microphone. And your job as the host is to make them forget that this microphone's there, that the cameras are over there, and really get in deep as if we're just sitting around having a cup of coffee and pouring ourselves out and trying to work through some issues. So I love when that happens, because 99% of the time we're up and everybody's like, wow, an hour's up already.
I was just most of the time at the end of it, everybody's like, wow, that was so fast.
Yeah, it's great. It's a wonderful feeling.
It's like three people sitting around a table bullshitting.
The one thing I don't like about doing this show is I do not like when people see me. Oh, yeah, I watched you on the show. I'm like, oh, God, I don't. Because we talk about some, and we're boneheads in here, and we say stuff that's off color, and like, how are they going to react? You never quite know.
Did I really piss? I saw you on the show. You really pissed me off that day.
You really pissed off Jerry Cooney. Good job.
And Clark.
Annie, thank you so much for sending that in. Keep sending in your questions. We will try to get them on the air. So, Blake, you're a big man coming from South Jersey. I know we have some mutual friends because of how you grew up. We've spoken a little bit about it. Everybody thinks that it's a shore town. First of all, you got to remember, you're in North Jersey. Where you're from, it's the beach, where everybody up here thinks it's the shore. But why don't you tell our audience a little bit about yourself, a little bit how you grew up?
So coming down, growing up in at the shore area, right? There's always a difference between the Jersey Shore and, people say, well, North Jersey, South Jersey, two different things, right? And my whole life I've been hearing, well, North Jersey, you have the New York people that go to the shore, right? Your Long Island, your Staten Island, your Bronx, whatever, come from New York. Not only go to New York beaches, but go to North Jersey beaches, right?
Seaside, Point Pleasant, Belmar.
Yeah. Asbury Park. But in South Jersey, it's a little different.
Pennsylvania.
Yeah. It's all PA.
Philadelphia people.
Bleeding Green, the Eagles, the Phillies, Flyers, Sixers. It's mainly Philadelphia people. And outside the Philadelphia, they call the suburbs or the main line. You're talking about Villanova area. Where St. Joe's University and all the media, Broomall, PA, Malvern, PA.
King of Prussia.
Yeah. Where I grew up in Margate is located about 10 minutes from Atlantic City. I'm in a little short town. And
Lucy the Elephant. That's all you got to say. You know, on the beginning of vacation itself is a picture of Lucy the elephant.
Real quick, you know what's funny? Every time I say Margate, most people who aren't from the area have no idea. But one thing that most people will say is Lucy the elephant.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm like, how do you remember an elephant? I mean, like, it's a big deal. It's a big trademark for Margate. It goes back to the 1800s. But really, the elephant's all you took from Margate?
I mean, Margate is such a beautiful place, so all I remember is the elephant.
Yeah.
So Margate, when I was growing up, was like the Jewish section of South Jersey. And then now I believe it's Longport, if I'm not mistaken. But that was where the concentration of the Jewish community lived. And now, you know, because even though they were Jewish, they all went to Holy Spirit.
Yeah.
They all went to Holy Spirit.
Or Atlantic City High.
Yeah. Back, so you got to remember this. We're not talking new Atlantic City High.
Right.
The old Atlantic City High. The old Atlantic City High was not the nicest place in the world. Of course, I had to go to Holy Spirit because my sending school was Pleasantville, and we all know how that is. But as it turns out, I coached with a guy that I played against in junior league football in Pleasantville. Yeah. So, but Margate's an interesting place because it's got some of the most pristine beaches around. It's got some great bars, great restaurants, and it was always the upper class.
I was gonna say it's affluent down there.
Oh, it is. Even Ventnor used to be that way. I think Ventnor's changing now.
Yes, in terms of
demographics, it's people moving out of Atlantic City are starting to move in there, and it's unfortunately bringing some of the bad element with it.
Yeah, so Ventnor still has from my experience, Ventnor was like a decent area to live. Wasn't real bad, but I know what you're saying. Like the inflow from Atlantic City a little bit into like deep into Ventnor can be a little dicey. But for the most part, Ventnor is really still a big destination for second homeowners from Philadelphia. Margate has like I said, has a lot of people from Philadelphia have second homes. Longport, and also Ventnor too. Is a big summer destination. Ventnor almost has as much as Margate, if not, a little less than Margate as far as people coming in, tourists and stuff like that. So it's when you get into Atlantic City, and certain sections of Atlantic City can be a little dangerous depending on where you're going. But
is Margate more of a residential or second home place?
Margate, I want to say, is still residential, but it's been shifted. Yeah. Now, when my dad was younger, growing up in the area, it was strictly like residential, and he had a lot of kids in his graduating class from like the 8th grade middle school in Margate. And that number diminished as time went on, and we come to present day. And it seems to be a lot more second homeowners, but still a pretty good year-round presence, I would say. But there's some short towns that you go south, like past Ocean City, like Sea Isle, Avalon, Stone Harbor, Wildwood, and Cape May are kind of like deserted in the winter time.
Oh, yeah. So Avalon, I used to work in Avalon. Yeah. I used to work at a place called Jack's Place, and they had 2 cops in the winter, and in the summer, 30 on a shift. Most of them were specials, of course. But in Margate's changing a little bit. So when I grew up, Margate's where all the mobsters live. Okay, some big events happened there. That's where Vincent Falcone was murdered by Phil Leonetti. That's where Chucky Merlino
allegedly
lived. Yeah. No, it absolutely happened. He said it in open court. This is open record. It's where Chucky Merlino lived. That's where Joey Merlino grew up, who is now the current alleged mob boss of Philly. But that's where because it was the wealthier area, and that's where they hung out. That's where Scarfo used to dock his boats and all that stuff. So it has some dark history, but it has some interesting history that everybody's interested in. I don't know what it's like now. I got to tell you, I don't know what it's like now, if those stories even circulate around Margate.
I think what it was back in the day was completely different. To a little bit what you were saying, obviously that was more like my father's time, my grandfather. So I can't really speak on that. More present day, I think that's kind of shifted. I don't think you see that much anymore. From my understanding, just kind of growing up as a kid in the area, it's just kind of just more like a lot of people I would say second homeowners. You don't really hear much buzz about those kind of things, right? I just think it's a little different as time went on.
They were great neighbors to have. I mean, we worked in towns in North Jersey. We all knew who the mobsters were as a cop. But they were great to have as neighbors because they were ultra respectful. They never brought crap home with them.
And it makes for a safe neighborhood.
That's it. That's it. So by me saying that they lived there, it actually made it a good neighborhood.
Right.
Like you knew it was a good neighborhood. And then they went to Atlantic City and they did their stuff. Mm-hmm. So where'd you go to school?
Well, in Margate, I went to, there's 3 schools. Actually, it's funny. Now, one of the schools is a public works building. But so now there's only 2 schools. There's there's the elementary school, which is like, I believe now kindergarten through, I want to say 5th grade or 6th grade. I want to say 5th grade. And then now in high school, which is the middle school, is still 6th through 8th. So I grew up in, going to the 3 schools. Union Avenue School was the kindergarten through 2nd grade. And it was called Union Avenue because it was on Union Avenue in Margate. And now it's a Public City Works building. So it's funny, you think a little town, right, like Margate, why is there 3 schools? And I always laugh growing up, and even like me and my friends, and like, why do we have 3 schools? I mean, you really could just fit every kid in one school. It's not that big of a town, right? So I went through all my grade schooling in Margate, and then for high school I attended Saint Augustine Prep, which is the good old home of the Hermits out there in Buena Township, Richland, New Jersey, and we had the rivals of Holy Spirit.
Holy Spirit High School Spartans.
And it's funny, my dad actually graduated from Holy Spirit. I think we talked about that before on my show. But yeah, Holy Spirit was a big rival. Middle Township High School down in Cape May Courthouse was always a big rival. Yeah. 2 legendary coaches, Coach Tom Farraco, who's retired now, was the long-term time coach for Middle Township boys basketball, which I'm sure you remember, Mr. Coach Farraco. I do,
because I actually almost transferred to Seton Hall. Or not Seton Hall. Sorry.
You can transfer to Seton Hall.
I got Seton Hall Prep on St. Augustine. I almost transferred there, I think, my sophomore or junior year. But that ride, holy cow, that ride, it was like 40 minutes for me. I said, I'm not going to handle 40 minutes. So that's the only reason I didn't go. But I have some good friends, like, Tom Coyle, who was the girls basketball coach. I grew up with his son, Brian, who I believe now is coaching there. So I had some friends that went there, and Mark Reardon was the football coach. Was it Mark Reardon or Charlie Roman? I went to school with both of those guys. They were 2 or 3 years older than me. So I have ties to all that area. I still have ties to all that area, but I just don't go down there that much.
Yeah.
But so I'll bet you St. Augustine's was licking their chops when they saw you, because I don't know when you hit your growth spurt, but I guarantee it wasn't last week.
Let's just say, how big were you in 8th grade? Because they, like you said, they had to be licking their chops.
So I was always a big kid growing up. When I was graduate 8th grade, I believe I was 6'1". And my growth spurt actually happened when I was at St. Augustine's. I want to say the end of my sophomore year, a little bit of my freshman, but mainly my sophomore year, I went from like a 6'1" to like 6'6". And maybe a year and a half span, I grew about 5 inches. And I got a funny story too. I remember at the end of practice one day at the prep, and we were just at the end of practice every day we'd shoot foul shots for about 20 minutes. We used to have long 3-hour practices. They were tough. And at the end we'd always finish with foul shots before we brought it in for the day, and we huddled it up. And this is the first time I ever really attempted to dunk the basketball, right, at basketball practice. And I'm lining up on the foul line. I shoot my 2 foul shots. And I said, you know what? It was always a theme or a thing to go do a layup after you shot 2 foul shots. And then you pass the ball to your next teammate in line who's going to shoot his 2 foul shots. So I just shot my 2. And then always they give you like one more bounce pass for a layup before you, and then you lay the ball up and then you give it to the next teammate. So instead of a layup, I said, you know what? I'm feeling pretty good. I'm feeling like pretty energetic right now. I'm
springy,
loose. I'm feeling a little loose. I'm going to try to dunk this thing. I didn't really say anything to anybody. My teammate just kind of thought it in my head. So I took a couple dribbles and I jumped up there and I dunked it with one hand. I'm like, oh my God, like I didn't even think I was going to do it. And even my teammates are like, oh, okay. Like, wow, look at you. I guess like they all have like, when we were kids slang, like, look at you, or okay, you got hops, or whatever they said back then when I was younger. But it was like a proud moment for me. I was kind of like excited. And because I don't remember ever doing that before, and it just kind of happened out of nowhere. So
you grew, but you didn't really outgrow your body, because we had a guy that lived by us. He sprouted up in like 1 year. He was the biggest, clumsiest. He had to grow into his body, and he couldn't do that in high school.
And that's true too. Like even growing up, like I remember like some real tall guys, even taller than me, kind of had a hard time fitting into their body, maybe didn't get the footwork down when it comes to different post moves or whatever. But I was kind of fortunate, and I've always had like trainers, and I've always played year round. I was fortunate to be able to, kind of grow into my body pretty well, where I didn't feel like a clumsy.
Awkward.
Exactly.
Yeah, they get awkward because, I see that now with my son's in 8th grade, and oddly enough, if my son hits a growth spurt in sophomore year, I'm going to lose my mind because I'm tired of buying him pants. He's 6'1" now. He's 13. So I watch him, and I watch him real close, because big guys, people don't realize something. Big guys get picked on every bit as much as little guys. because people, they test them. They test them. They're like, let me see what this guy's made of. And then one day, that big guy realizes that, wait a minute. They realize how big they are.
Right.
And he's like, but most of the time they're gentle giants. Most of the time. Thank God.
It's kind of like poke the bear syndrome.
Yeah. And I tell my kids, I said, just beware of that. Beware that people are going to test you. Little guys are going to test you. They're going to try to act tough. Just remember, you're bigger and you're stronger than them. It doesn't mean you got to show it all the time.
It's easier to punch down than punch up.
Yeah. Did you ever get tested?
I never really had a lot of instances where kids messed with me or I had to defend myself. There was only there wasn't a couple times, maybe, somebody, a kid thought he was like a jokester or thought he was funny. And I remember I was actually on the beach with my mom, and it was like around sunset, and I knew the kid from school, and he had a reputation to be kind of like a goofball kid, a bad kid. And he just kind of like, he would test everybody. So he was saying something to me or kind of like trying to mock me or kind of provoke me. And like, I had a really good like temper. I just kind of laughed it off. But then he was saying some things that were kind of getting annoying, like starting to aggravate me. So it's funny. I started to chase after him, and good thing my mom was at the other end of the beach. She goes, Blake, stop right now. Where are you going? Stop. Like she kind of had an idea that I was going to go after this kid. And obviously I didn't touch him or nothing happened. I just kind of stopped and he kind of ran off to wherever he was going. But I never really had anyone like physically try to lay their hands on me. And one thing I always hated, and I still hate, like anyone who tries to be a bully.
Yeah.
Exactly. And that's one thing, even like when I was younger, one thing that I couldn't really stand, and it wasn't just because I felt like I was a big guy and I was macho, I was better than everybody. You could be 4'11" and hate bullies. Doesn't matter if you're 7'2" or 4'11". Anyone who has that idea that they don't like the idea of bullying, my hat off to them, right? And hats off to them and I never really was a fan of that, a fan of bullying.
And on the flip side, you could be 4'11" and be a bully.
Yeah.
Well, that's where most of them are, because
exactly.
they have
Napoleon syndrome.
They got little man's disease. Yeah. It happens. It's real. And people look at you and they're going to think, well, he doesn't get messed with, but that's not always true because I've seen it more times than not.
Yeah.
One of my proudest moments in football, it was an Indian kid. And first year playing football, he's a nice kid, like super, super nice kid. And one of the kids who was like this bad kid was testing him and said a very negative thing towards him. And I heard it, and I pull him aside. I said, "Don't you ever let anybody talk to you like that." Next thing I know, the kid says something else. He goes, "Go fuck yourself." And I go, "Good for you, man."
Yeah.
I was so proud of
him.
I was so proud of him because this is not the kid to step up on somebody.
Right.
But he learned. I said, "You're bigger than this kid. Don't bully him, but don't take that stuff from anybody."
Yeah.
And so I'm very conscious of that. I'm very conscious of that stuff. So you basketball, no football?